Well, good morning, everybody. This is Ray Woolridge, and I want to introduce to you Michel Hendricks. I'm the executive director of Life Model Works, and we've been around for 50 years. And yet we're in a new season. We've pivoted this year. I joined the team in September, and we were blessed to be able to bring on our team Michel Hendricks, who has partnered with Jim Wilder to write an incredible book, The Other Half of Church, that's having a huge impact in our world today and in our lives. And so, good morning, Michel. I'm glad you could join me for this interview.
Yeah, good morning, Ray. It's good to be here. I'm glad we get to talk about these things.
Yeah, it's a joy. It's a joy to work together every week. And you joined our team. When was it?
Back at the beginning of October, so it's been several months already.
Yeah, we're building this airplane while it's flying, right?
Yeah, it's kind of what it feels like a lot of the time.
It really does. Well, you came so highly recommended, and with your background so diverse, and Deborah and I loved sitting on the deck in September. We wouldn't want to eat on our deck today. It's a little cold outside, but we had a wonderful time with you and Claudia. And as we sat there, we realized, wow, these people are a part of our tribe. We felt a kinship with you immediately. And so, Michel, for our viewers, those who are going to watch this on YouTube or through other media, tell us about yourself, your personal background, your family background.
I grew up in a fairly large family. I had four sisters. I was the only boy, fourth of fifth child, and grew up in Denver, Colorado. And didn't grow up in a Christian family. About the only time I ever went to church is when I would visit my grandma in Nebraska. So that was like, once a year or something, or a couple times a year we might go, and maybe she would drag us along to church. And so that was really my only exposure to that. But I was always a curious person about things, and but just didn't know much. And then when I was 19 years old, it was the summer after my freshman year of college, I went to bed and could not fall asleep. And so finally I gave up on falling asleep and went and to a big bookshelf in my parents' home and tried to find a book that would make me sleepy. And I saw a Bible there, and I remembered how boring church was when I'd go with my grandma. So I thought, well, must be a boring book, because church was always boring for me the few times I went. So I grabbed a Bible and I opened it to the first page of the New Testament, of all places. I just kind of randomly opened. That's some divine intervention there.
Yeah.
And I just started reading Matthew, and it starts out with the genealogies, which I thought, wow, this really is a boring book. But luckily, I didn't give up before getting to the end of the genealogies. And so I started reading about the life of Jesus, and that's really what hit me. And I just thought, I'd been struggling with existential questions about what's the meaning of life and things like that. And really what I heard during that first 5 chapters of Matthew as I read is essentially God saying to me, without any words being spoken, but saying to me, these questions you have about the meaning of life, you will find them in my son. This man is the answer to your questions. And that, to me, was such a surprising, it was almost like an explosion. It's an earthquake, one of those kind of existential earthquakes that happen. And my life's never been the same since that night.
Wow. I remember the first time I read the Bible after coming to faith in Christ, and that dry, dusty book came alive.
Yeah.
And the Word of God has power. So you went back to college that fall, and in your book, I read a fascinating story about your encounter with your roommate. Tell us about that.
Yeah, my roommate, one of my good friends from my freshman year, his name was Steve Lowe. He was a Taiwanese American from Pittsburgh, and he lived on my dorm floor, and we just hit it off really well, and we decided to live together the following year, and so to be roommates. And so I showed up early to our room. He hadn't arrived yet, and I was unpacking and everything. And he showed up a few hours later and walked in the door, set his suitcases down on the floor, and said, "Mike, I don't know if I'm going to live with you this year." And that was quite the shocker, because I'm thinking, wait, this was our plan and everything. And I said, "Well, what's up, Steve?" And he said, "Well, I've been, how last year we partied a lot, we got drunk together." He said, "Over the summer, I grew up as a Christian, and I am a Christian. I've decided I'm not going to do that partying with you anymore, and so you may not want to live with me." And and at that point, I'd probably been reading the Bible for a month or so. And so as soon as he said, "I am a Christian," I kind of ignored the rest of what he was saying and just waited for him to stop talking. And as soon as he stopped talking, as soon as I got my opening, I said, "Steve, I'm a Christian too." And I explained to him what happened to me that night. and he was stunned as well. And but he was the one at the end. We sat down and I just started asking him question after question after question about all these things that have all these questions. I mean, I don't think I was understanding half of what I was reading as I was reading the Bible. So I just asked him question after question. He knew a lot more than I did. And finally, after maybe 2 hours of that, and he basically said, I think, Mike, we should get involved in a Christian group. And so I didn't even know what a Christian group was, but we got involved with one. And it was, for me, truly a defining and significantly influencing time of my life, that first community that I had on the campus.
And you talked about what that was like, how it felt to be in that group, the joy that group had with one another, the relational connection was just it really changed your life, didn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because I had, in my family, with 5 kids, my parents were often overwhelmed. I didn't get a lot of one-on-one attention to me and my character and building me up and things. And very quickly in this group, as I got more involved, I would have these more mature men and women, students, as well as some of the staff. They would be speaking truth into my life. They'd be telling me who I am. They'd be happy to see me. And for me, this was completely revolutionary. And I felt like it was making me a different person. Like I didn't understand it at the time. We know more now about the actual neuroscience of it, how Jesus designed us and also the spiritual aspect of it. But all I could tell you then is, by the time I went home, the first time I went home after going up that semester was for Thanksgiving, November, like what we just recently did. And I was nervous about going home because I thought, I feel like I'm a completely different person just in these 3 months. Like, is my family even going to recognize me? That's how different I felt just in 3 months.
Yeah, I remember my parents thinking I had joined a cult. I came to faith in Christ in college as well. And I was raised in a Christian home and we were in church every Sunday, but we probably would have been considered the frozen chosen. And I went away and had accepted Jesus and I was so passionate. And it was a fascinating experience. Well, let's shift gears a little bit because we're going to talk a little more about some changes you made in your view of things in recent years. But what type of work in ministry have you done?
Well, I've done a little bit of everything. I worked in corporate world for a good 25 years. My latest stint was at a startup company where we were developing advanced technology for the Navy SEALs. Which was really fun, but it ran into some funding problems. And at the same time, simultaneously to my career, I started going to seminary. And so through the extensive capacity of my brain, I was able to compress a 3-year degree into 11 years.
I relate, man. It took me 4 years, but I was working 3 jobs. I wasn't working full time though. They were all 3 part-time jobs.
Yeah, I basically, I was working full time. We had 3 small kids. And so my wife and I just made an agreement that I'll do most of my studying during lunchtime. So I'd go during lunchtime at work, I'd go study. Wow. And then over the weekends. And I just took enough classes so that I could still stay a part of our family in a healthy way. That was usually 1 or 2 classes a semester. That's all I could do. But I thoroughly enjoyed seminary.
Goodness. Wow. Now, for a stint, you lived in Argentina. To say more about that.
Yeah, this group I was involved in the university, there was a group of Argentine students that wanted to start the similar thing up in their university in the city of Rosario. And so we moved there. I didn't speak any Spanish, so I had to move to Costa Rica first for 6 months and study in-depth kind of saturation type Spanish, lived with a Costa Rican family. And that was really fun too. I enjoyed that a lot. And then went to Argentina, and then it was 5 Argentine students and 4 of us from Colorado working together, 9 of us working together for a year. And it was a good year. It was a hard year. It was a transformational year. And I also met my wife that year. I didn't know it at the time. We didn't start dating when I was down there, but I met my wife during that time. So that's a very warm memory for me as well.
Yo hablo un poco español. Tú hablas mucho español.
Yeah, when my wife and I started dating, she didn't speak much English at all. As a matter of fact, one of the ways I got her into the United States for an extended period of time, because if you get a tourist visa, they only can come for 90 days, I think it is. And so I enrolled her in the university here for English as a second language for the entire summer.
Hmm.
And that would actually give us a chance to date.
Wow.
Imagine trying to date someone from another country. It's like you have tourist visas and everything, but that gave her an education visa for that semester. And then we basically had to say, okay, this is fish or cut bait time. Either in the next 4 months, we're going to date and get married, or we're going to be friends for life. But this is, a nice try. It didn't work out. And luckily it worked. She came in, I think she came in May. We started dating officially in the beginning of June. And then I asked her to marry me in August. And then we got married in October. And then we got married again in November.
Goodness, that's fast.
So we can tell our children that we're really on our second marriage.
Now, her parents were okay with her spending a summer in Colorado to study English and maybe date this guy?
They were, surprisingly. Her parents were my wife became a follower of Jesus, very similar to me, where it's just kind of like this light just came on, and her family was very opposed to that for a while.
Hmm.
But they had a cousin who had a very bad, horrible sickness, long-term healthcare problems, lots of financial problems from it. And my wife's church really just came around the family and started raising money for the family and doing fundraisers. And when she had to go to the hospital, they would use their church network to find them free places to stay so they wouldn't have to pay a hotel. And that whole caring of the church completely just turned my in-laws' attitudes towards Christian around.
Wow.
And so by the time I came around, they were like very happy to know me and everything. If it would have been 5 years earlier, their attitude probably would not have been the same.
Goodness. Wow. What a story.
Yeah.
Say more about your family, your children, Claudia and your kids.
Well, we got married in our early 30s, so we kind of had to get after child rearing quickly. So we basically had 3 kids in 3 years.
Yeah.
And so we raised them with Spanish as their first language. So all of our baby, child, toddler pictures, they're all speaking Spanish.
Hmm.
We were advised this we talked with some multilingual, bicultural couples, and they said, yeah, it's definitely speak the language of the opposite language of the country where you're living, because they'll get the language where you're living, so speak the other language at home, and then they'll be bilingual.
Wow.
And that was important to us too, because we want them to be able to communicate well with their abuelos, their grandma and grandpa, and their uncle and aunts and their cousin. We want them to have actually meaningful conversations. And so it was very important to us. So even in high school, our kids were kind of like complaining, oh, we don't want to be in Spanish. Do we really need to take Spanish? And we didn't really give them a choice at that. We said, you are taking Spanish. You're getting all the grammar. You're going to refine how you can speak. And every single one of them, sometime during high school, because they would complain through middle school and early high school, but every single one, especially after they took the AP test and they got 5s on the AP test, and they said, we are so thankful that you forced us to speak Spanish, because we wouldn't have spoke the way we did, and we definitely wouldn't have got 5 on an AP test if we hadn't, been raised in it. So
Exactly.
they kind of had an unfair advantage, but they were thankful in the end.
Exactly. Well, what was your first exposure to the life model?
Well, I eventually became a pastor of spiritual formation in a church in our area, and I just kept hitting my head against the wall as far as the question of how do people change? How does discipleship really work? How does character change? And I would, I read a lot of Dallas Willard, so I created a training on spiritual disciplines, a 5-week training. I wrote a book for new Christians. I did all sorts of different kind of resources, and I kept, they kind of made me more and more confused, because they seemed to work sometimes and they wouldn't work other times. And they would work for some people and not for other people. Like spiritual disciplines, they seemed to just like revolutionize some people's lives, and other people, they didn't get traction. It just didn't seem to work. And so I was left in a state where I would be in my office just scratching my head, looking at my dry erase board and wondering, well, how do people change? Like, God, give me a picture. I'll draw it down. I'll draw it on my whiteboard if you give me a picture. It was sometime around that time where I got a call from a man, and he had visited our church and wanted to have lunch with me. So I sat down at lunch with him, and he said, I've been lifelong friends with Dallas Willard. And I went and visited your church, and I saw some of the trainings you're doing. And he says, it seems like you're actually actually trying to do what Dallas writes in his books. He said Dallas used to complain that, you know, he would say, everybody's reading my books, but it seems like almost no churches are actually doing it.
Hmm.
And he said, you seem to be doing it. And I said, yeah, I am doing it, but sometimes it seems to be working and sometimes it doesn't seem to be working. I don't understand why.
Wow.
And so his name was Bob. He said, why don't we start meeting every month, you and me? And I pulled in another friend of mine who's a pastor of another church here in Boulder. And we just kind of dug in and started reading and talking and studying various aspects of discipleship. And how do we get that back into the church? How do we make churches more transformational? And it was Bob who introduced me to Jim Wilder.
Ah.
So he said he would start saying curious things like, I think we need to, in our discipleship studies, we need to think about how our brain was designed and what role that plays in us growing as disciples of Jesus. And he would say those things and I'd have no idea what he was even talking about. So
Wow.
finally I said, Bob, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean? And so he said, well, let me invite my friend Jim Wilder to our meeting next month. And I thought, I'll let him explain it.
Wow. So you really pressed into everything that you were learning in that season. Why was it that you really pressed in like that?
Well, it's for personal and professional reasons. You know, my job was to help people grow, and I didn't know how to help people grow. So I basically didn't know how to do my job. And more personally, it applied the same to myself. Like there were areas in my life that were just kind of stubborn to change, or I didn't know how to change them. They seemed to be, I didn't know how to, you know, none of the spiritual disciplines seemed to really touch those areas.
Mm.
You know, some of my life changed really well with spiritual disciplines, and others seemed to not respond at all.
Yeah.
And so at my own life, even I'm thinking, you know, I don't know how I change. It's not just the people in my church, it's me. And so I already had this innate hunger, and I'd been praying about it too. So it's very much an answer to prayer. I look back, you know, and think God saw me scratching my head in my office as a pastor, and he lined up Bob to call me, and then lined up Jim Wilder. So it was a very, very divine encounter, and I feel very kind, like God showed his kindness to me very much in bringing Jim Wilder and his wife Kitty into my wife and my life.
Yeah, you had a unique opportunity to be in a focus group with them as he was developing the Pandora problem. So tell us about that.
Yeah, he was in the process of writing the Pandora problem. For those of you who don't know, it's a book on narcissism and its role in the church. And I had not even thought of that whole topic at all. So he invited my wife and me to join a group of other people with him. And as he was writing, he would like unload the chapters on us, have us read a chapter or two. Then we'd drive up to their house, all 12 of us, and then give him feedback. And then he would try out some of the exercises. And so I feel like my brain was just constantly being stretched, and you know, and half the time I didn't understand what I was reading, honestly, because I've never really thought about this kind of stuff. You know, he started talking about the importance of Hesed and our attachment, and I didn't know even what that really was.
Mm.
And he would talk about, you know, group identity and all these things. So these are all these areas that are meant, that our brain looks to change our character, that I'd never heard of. But as I started understanding them, I very much felt they were answers to my prayers.
Yeah.
Very specific answers to the things I was praying as a very confused pastor of spiritual formation.
And it was about that same time that you started going to Thrive training.
Yeah, well, before that, actually, Jim and Kitty offered to lead a 15-week training from the Pandora on how to loving our enemies. They offered to lead it in our house if we could get 15 people.
Hmm.
So we sent out 15 emails to 15 people, and we got like 30 people showed up. I think the word spread.
Yeah.
And so for 15 weeks, Jim and Kitty were driving to our house and leading us for 2 hours in teaching and training on loving our enemies, designed to make to immunize our community against narcissism, but simultaneously teach us how to love our enemies. Those skills overlap.
Yeah.
You know, as we learn to love our enemies, that's actually also changing the culture of the church in a way that narcissism can't really take hold very well. Mm. And it was during that 15 weeks where someone at the Moody publishers called Jim up, and they said, we read your Pandora book and we think it's a very important book. But we also think there's a lot of Christians that are not going to be able to get their wade through it because it's pretty thick. It's not necessarily easy to read,
Mm-hmm.
especially for younger Christians. And they
Yeah.
said, we would love for you to write kind of an easier book that's more of an on-ramp that prepares people for the Pandora so that they'll understand it better, like an on-ramp to it, and to some of your other work as well. And Jim Wilder said, yeah, I think that's a really good idea, but I think Michel Hendricks should write that book. But he said that without telling me. So he just showed up the next week at our training. He says, I have some news for you, Michael. And then told me the story. And he said, so you're going to be writing a book. And I was still at a level of knowledge. I'd been doing this maybe for a year, if that. And so I didn't necessarily feel like I was qualified to write a book.
Mm.
And even Moody said, well, why don't, instead of Michael writing the book, why don't you and Michael write it together? He can do I can do most of the writing, but Jim can really inform the content, make sure I'm talking about things right. And Kitty Wilder is really the one who says, if you're going to write this book too, you need to get through Thrive. And so she really kind of is the mover of getting me and my wife into Thrive as fast as possible. And so she was the prime mover in that.
Yeah. Deborah and I are right behind you guys. We got one more track to go. It's been a game changer for us. So how has the life model and all these things you've been learning through Thrive training and the Pandora group, how's that changed your life?
Well, that's a whole topic I could talk for an hour.
Yeah, sure.
But really abbreviated version, the biggest thing for my wife and me, we think, is the skill of learning how to see what Jesus sees.
Hmm.
And the point of one of the goals of life is to see everything through Jesus's eyes.
Yeah.
And it's easy to tell a person that, but you can't do that just by direct willpower. They have, Jim and others have created Emmanuel practices, and then the whole slew of what we get in Thrive and other things of practices that actually just kind of bring your relational right brain back online and start working it out to a point where we're able to do that. Because it takes a bunch, of raising joy and learning how to attach securely, learning how to quiet yourself, being aware of the state of your relational brain when it kind of goes wonky on you, and knowing how to get it back to running smoothly. All these kind of skills that requires a lot of work. And honestly, a lot of the work is really hard.
Yeah, it is.
Hard too. A lot of trauma will come up as you build joy.
That's right.
And do some of this other stuff. And then you got to have some really hard work with Jesus around painful memories, our own failures, things that were done to us, things that were not done to us, that were neglectful.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of, it's not this necessarily rosy thing, but it is truly changes the very fabric, emotional and relational fabric of my life. And my wife would say the same thing.
Yeah. I was pretty stressed out on Monday of this week, working on a lot of stuff. And I came up into the upstairs to get some lunch, and Deborah looked at me. She said, "Are you overwhelmed right now?" And I had not even registered that I was overwhelmed and I needed to take a break.
Yeah.
And my relational brain was shutting down. And it was so helpful to have that language and have each other and encourage one another to stay relational at all times.
Yeah.
So it's a game changer. So tell us about why you've chosen to join our team. What we offered you the opportunity to be on the team, and you said yes. Tell us about that.
Well, this is really what I was doing already. Even, in a sense, when you started talking to me, I said, I'm doing this work already. And the question is more, do we do it together or do we do it in a separate venue? And it seemed to me that there was pretty good alignment between what the life model would like me to do and what I was doing anyway. So it seemed, I felt a nudge from God, and it seemed like it was a good fit for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've been such a great addition to the team. And as we go into 2021, developing a capability to consult with churches and organizations, it's just so exciting, along with all the other things you're doing. Well, we're kind of coming to the end of our time together, but what are your hopes and dreams for Life Model Works in the next season?
Well, really, my hopes and dreams, I don't even think so much of Life Model Works, but my hope and dream is to bring the transformation of character back into the center of church.
Yeah.
Where I believe it belongs, and where I believe, if you read the other half of church, I think you'll see too that Jesus always had his his eye on the ball, which is the transformation of the character, especially of these 12 young men who were following him around for 3 years. And in a lot of churches, we've really gotten our eye off that ball, or we've forgotten that it exists altogether. And my passion is to be able to work with churches and to work with ministries and help them with create transformational society cultures in their churches, to a place where like radical character transformation becomes a common occurrence. It's like kind of almost what we expect rather than an unusual thing. And we largely, I realized I did not know how people change, and the way people change was not what I was told it was. And I feel the life model really had, God has really used and anointed Jim Wilder and many other people to give us a really robust view of how we change into the image of Jesus. And that's really what this is all about.
That's absolutely right. And when I came into my role as executive director, the board wanted me to strategize ways to get the life model into actual churches.
Yeah.
But it's not really about that. It's about transformation into the image of Christ. And that is not, as we have seen in the solution of choice and many other resources, that is not a left brain activity. It's a whole brain activity.
Right.
And those parts of us that have been resistant to change, the people I develop and work with, they're not stuck because they don't know scriptural principles and creeds and Bible verses. They're stuck for relational and emotional reasons usually.
Right. That's the case we often see. And, we'd be so excited to work with churches and ministries now and help them really experience what you and I have experienced in our lives. And it's so good that I don't want us to keep it to ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Michael, this has been a real joy to talk to you today. I know our tribe and our broader viewing audience are going to really enjoy getting to know you. Of course, we look forward to next year having Transform face-to-face. We're working on a venue selection right now, and we'd love to hear more. And many people want to meet you and talk to you. And I would just, I thank you for taking a risk on us, for saying yes, for joining the team. You're a joy to work with. Love you and Claudia. And one of our hopes would be that our footprint in the Latin American world, in Mexico and South and Central America, would be expanded. And we're going to be strategizing about that as well. I'm learning Spanish as fast as I can, and so I can at least show respect and understand a little bit. But just really appreciate you, and thank you for all you're doing for Life Model Works and to spread this message around the world.
Thank you, Ray, and I thank you for the opportunity to share this little bit of my story.
Well, God bless you. We'll be talking soon.
Okay.